Breaking news. A man fatally shot his two young children and wife before then killing himself.
The couple owned two popular Montrose restaurants.
Jason Miles is live outside the family's home on Kingston Street after speaking with both friends and neighbors.
In one of the most disturbing murder-suicides to shake Houston's restaurant scene, prominent restaurateur Thai Mitchell was killed alongside her two young children, allegedly by her husband, Matthew Mitchell, before he turned the gun on himself.
What if the last meal you ever shared with your family happened the night before anyone even knew you were gone? That is the question that would haunt everyone who knew the Mitchells. Because by the time the world found out something was wrong, by the time the phone calls came in and the worried texts went unanswered, it was already too late. 4 people were already dead inside a quiet home on a quiet street in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Texas. And nobody had heard a single thing. Houston, Texas, a city that prides itself on reinvention, a city of oil money, sprawling highways, and a food scene that has quietly become one of the most exciting in the entire country. If you wanted proof of that, you didn't have to look any further than a cozy, warmly lit restaurant tucked into the Montrose neighborhood called Traveler's Table. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was an experience. A menu that pulled from Thailand, Mexico, West Africa, South America, all of it sitting side by side, daring you to try something you had never tasted before. People didn't just come to eat. They came to travel without ever leaving their seat. And the people behind that vision were 2 individuals who, by every public measure, had built exactly the life they wanted. Matthew Mitchell was 52 years old. Before restaurants, he had been a pharmaceutical executive, the kind of man who knew how to build things, how to run organizations, how to project confidence in every room he walked into. He was polished, well-connected, and according to those who knew him, intensely driven. Thy Mitchell, full name Thy My Mitchell, was 39 years old and by many accounts the magnetic center of everything the brand had become. Born into a Vietnamese-American family, she had that rare ability to make everyone around her feel seen. She was a food influencer who moved through Houston's culinary world with ease, attending event after event, photographing dishes, building community, showing up. She wasn't just the co-owner of Traveler's Table. She was also co-owner of a second concept called Traveler's Cart, a more casual spin-off that had expanded the couple's footprint in the Montrose area. Together, they had also earned seats on the board of the Texas Restaurant Association, a statewide industry organization that represents thousands of restaurants across Texas. They had been selected by her peers, the people who worked alongside her, who competed with her, who admired her, to receive the Greater Houston Restaurateur of the Year award for 2025. She was pregnant with their 3rd child. They had 2 other children, a daughter 8 years old, a son 4 years old. To anyone paying attention from the outside, the Mitchells were the kind of family you pointed to as proof that hard work and ambition and love could all coexist in one place. Their restaurant had been featured on Guy Fieri's Food Network show Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Their names appeared in Houston press regularly. Their home sat at 2113 Kingston Street in River Oaks, one of the most expensive and exclusive neighborhoods in all of Houston, a place where old Texas money and new Texas ambition live side by side behind manicured hedges and iron gates. Nothing about the address, nothing about the family, nothing about the life they had constructed in public gave any signal of what was quietly unraveling behind closed doors. Monday evening, May 5, 2026. The calls started coming in. A babysitter who was supposed to hear from the family had not. A family member who expected contact had received nothing. No texts returned. No calls picked up. The silence was not normal. It was the kind of silence that sits differently, heavy, wrong, like a door left open that was always supposed to be closed. Someone made the decision to call Houston police and request a welfare check. Officers were dispatched to Kingston Street to knock on the door of the Mitchell family home and simply confirm that everything was all right. Everything was not all right. When officers entered the residence, they found 4 bodies: a man 52, a woman 39, a girl 8, a boy 4, all of them shot in the head. The time of death, as later confirmed by the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, was placed at 6:11 p.m. on Monday, meaning by the time anyone thought to check, the family had already been gone for hours, possibly since the night before. The house had been silent that entire time. The neighborhood had heard nothing. River Oaks, with all its wealth and all its security, had simply gone about its evening while inside one of its homes. Something unthinkable had already happened. Houston police arrived, secured the scene, and began piecing together what the evidence was telling them. And the evidence was telling a very specific story. There was no sign of a break-in. There was no indication of an outside intruder. The gun belonged to the household. Every piece of physical evidence at the scene pointed in a single, devastating direction. That the man of the house, Matthew Mitchell, had shot his wife, shot his 8-year-old daughter, shot his 4-year-old son, and then turned the gun on himself. By Tuesday morning, Houston police had named Matthew Mitchell, age 52, as the suspect. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences would go on to rule his death a suicide. The deaths of Maya and Maxwell Mitchell were each ruled homicides. The cause of death for every member of the family was the same, a gunshot wound to the head. Within hours, the tributes for Mitchell began pouring in across social media. Her sister confirmed the deaths publicly, posting photographs of and the children, describing them as having passed away on Monday night without yet saying how. The restaurant industry in Houston, in Texas, and far beyond began to absorb a loss it had no framework for. But the grief was moving faster than the answers. Because as of that Tuesday morning, there was still one question that nobody, not the police, not the community, not the family, could answer. Why? There is a particular kind of grief that comes not just from losing someone, but from realizing you never fully knew the world they were living in. The people who loved Mitchell, her friends, her colleagues, her peers in the restaurant industry, were not just mourning a woman. They were standing at the edge of a story they couldn't make sense of. Because the picture that had existed in public, the one carefully built over years of events and press coverage and social media posts and award ceremonies, did not match what had happened inside that house on Kingston Street. And as the days following the discovery began to unfold, Houston found itself doing what communities always do in the wake of something this violent and this intimate, searching for a version of events that could somehow make it make sense. Maya Mitchell had not arrived at the top of Houston's culinary world by accident. Her story was one of deliberate, passionate construction. She was Vietnamese-American, part of a family that understood the particular immigrant weight of building something from nothing in a country that doesn't always make that easy. Food, for was never just business. It was identity. It was memory. It was the most honest language she knew. When she and Matthew launched Traveler's Table in 2019, the concept reflected something deeply personal. The idea that a single table could hold the entire world, that cuisine from Thailand and Mexico and West Africa and South America could all belong in the same conversation, because people themselves contain multitudes. The restaurant became a love letter to that belief. And it worked. It resonated. Houstonians came in curious and left converted. Her public relations firm, South House PR, released a statement in the hours after her death was confirmed that captured something essential about how she moved through the world. They described her as not only a client but a great friend. They called her a devoted mother and a businesswoman. They said that if there was one thing about it was that she was always on her own journey, always looking for the next adventure. That description was not corporate language. It was the testimony of people who had watched her work, watched her show up, watched her pour herself into everything she touched. The Houston restaurant community does not give out its Restaurateur of the Year award based on resume alone. These peers had chosen her because they saw something in her, a quality of presence, a commitment to the industry, a generosity of spirit that made the people around her better at what they did. Sandy Nguyen, owner of Saigon Hustle and Sunday Press in Northwest Houston, took to Instagram to mourn the loss of her friend and fellow restaurateur. She was not alone. Message after message from chefs, owners, publicists, food writers, and industry workers filled the comment sections and timelines of Houston's culinary community. The Texas Restaurant Association, speaking through its president and CEO Emily Williams Knight, issued a formal statement that went beyond professional courtesy. Knight said that "Thy would be remembered as a ray of light who inspired everyone around her," and called on the industry to honor her memory by continuing to show up for each other with compassion. It was the language of someone describing not just a colleague, but a force. And yet there was Matthew. Matthew Mitchell at 52 was not an obscure figure. Before the restaurant world claimed him, he had operated in the high-stakes environment of pharmaceutical executive leadership, a world built on pressure, performance, and the relentless demand to deliver results. Transitioning from that world into the restaurant industry is not an unusual move for ambitious, entrepreneurial personalities, but the restaurant business carries its own brutal pressures. Margins are thin. Reputation is everything. The public visibility that makes a brand successful also means that every bad review, every slow night, every operational stumble plays out in a fishbowl. For someone wired to achieve and control, that environment can quietly become its own kind of vice grip. What was happening inside the Mitchell household in the weeks and months before May 5, 2026, is something investigators have not yet fully disclosed. No suicide note was publicly confirmed. No specific triggering incident has been named. No history of domestic violence reports. No prior calls to the home. No public indication that anything behind the warmly photographed exterior of their life was fracturing. That silence, the silence of no warning signs that the public could see, is itself one of the most disturbing features of this case, because it means that whatever pressure Matthew Mitchell was carrying, whatever darkness had settled into his thinking, he carried it invisibly. He smiled for photographs. He sat on industry boards. He ran 2 restaurants. He watched his pregnant wife accept the respect of her peers. And somewhere inside all of that, something had already gone catastrophically wrong. The children, Maya, 8 years old, and Maxwell, 4 years old, deserve to be held in this story not as footnotes to their parents' tragedy, but as individuals whose lives were complete and full and entirely their own. Maya was old enough to have a personality, preferences, friendships, a world. Maxwell was at that particular age of boyhood where everything is still wonder. They had no part in whatever storm was gathering around the adults in their lives. They were simply there, in their home, on a Monday evening in May, in a neighborhood where nothing bad was supposed to happen. The restaurant kept its doors open. Staff showed up. Managers held things together. The company statement asked for unity and respect for their privacy. And that perhaps is the most quietly devastating detail in all of it, that the dining room of Traveler's Table continued to fill with people having dinner, drinking wine, discovering new flavors, doing exactly what they had always wanted them to do. The table she had built was still welcoming strangers. But the woman who built it and the children she had brought into the world were gone. Houston was grieving, but it was also waiting, because the question that had hung in the air since Tuesday morning was still unanswered. The how was documented. The where was documented. The who was documented. What nobody had yet been able to explain, not the police, not the people who knew them, not the community that thought it understood them, was the part that always cuts the deepest in cases like this. Not what happened, but why. There is a saying that the people who seem the happiest in public are sometimes the ones carrying the heaviest things in private. It is the kind of observation that sounds like a cliché until you find yourself standing in front of a case like this one. Until you find yourself looking at the photographs of a smiling family, a thriving business, a pregnant wife glowing at an awards ceremony, and trying to reconcile all of that with 4 bodies on the floor of a River Oaks home. The Mitchell case does not offer the cold comfort of an obvious villain. It does not give us a stranger who broke in, a crime of opportunity, a random act of urban violence that we can file away under the category of senseless tragedy and move on from. What it gives us instead is something far more unsettling. A man who by every outward measurement had everything, and who chose, in a single irreversible hour, to destroy all of it. As of the days following the discovery, the Houston Police Department had not released a motive. No suicide note was confirmed to the public. No financial records were unsealed. No former colleagues stepped forward with accounts of erratic behavior. No neighbors reported hearing arguments through the walls of the Kingston Street home. The investigation, as it stood, was still piecing together the timeline of Matthew Mitchell's final hours. What he did that Sunday evening, what conversations may or may not have taken place, what state of mind could have driven a 52-year-old man with a pregnant wife and 2 young children to pick up a firearm and end 4 lives, including his own. What investigators and the public were left with was the physical evidence, and the physical evidence was unambiguous. The gun belonged to Matthew. The scene showed no signs of outside involvement. Every forensic conclusion pointed to the same sequence of events, that he had shot then Maya, then Maxwell, and then himself. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences placed the time of death at 6:11 p.m. on Monday. The welfare check did not come until hours later, when the silence of the family finally became loud enough that the people around them could no longer ignore it. That detail, the hours of silence, is worth sitting with, because it tells us something about the particular isolation that can exist even inside a life that looks, from the outside, like it is overflowing with connection. Thy Mitchell had a publicist. She had industry friends. She had a sister who loved her enough to be the first person to publicly confirm her death, to post her photographs, to grieve her openly in front of strangers on the internet. She had an entire community of restaurateurs and food professionals who knew her name and admired her work. And yet, on that Monday evening in that house, she was alone with a man whose interior world had apparently become a place no one around him had been permitted to see. The restaurant world that I helped build continued to wrestle publicly with what had happened. The statement from Traveler's Table management walked a careful line, honoring the staff who kept showing up, protecting the privacy of a family that no longer had any adults left to protect it, and trying to hold together a business that had been built by 2 people, one of whom was now identified by police as the person who murdered the other. That is an impossible position. There is no protocol for it. There is no industry handbook that tells you how to run a restaurant the week your co-founder is named as a murder suspect. And yet the lights stayed on. The kitchen kept cooking. Because for the employees who depended on Traveler's Table for their livelihoods, and for the community that had made it part of their lives, closing the doors would not have brought anyone back. Maya Mitchell was 8 years old. Maxwell Mitchell was 4. Their names were not released immediately by authorities. It was local reporting and family confirmation that eventually gave the public those details. Maya, Maxwell. They are names that deserve to be spoken, not buried inside the statistics of a case file. They were not collateral damage. They were not an extension of their parents' story. They were children who woke up that Sunday morning with no knowledge of what was coming, who ate breakfast and played and existed in the ordinary fullness of childhood, completely unaware that the person they trusted most in the world had already, in some dark corner of his mind, made a decision about all of them. That is the part of this story that no amount of investigation, no amount of forensic detail, no posthumous psychological profile will ever fully resolve, because the question of why a parent chooses to end the lives of their own children is one that human language was not built to answer cleanly. Investigators and mental health professionals who study familicide, the killing of an entire family unit, have identified patterns over decades of research. Financial ruin, perceived humiliation, a distorted sense of ownership, a psychological state in which the perpetrator becomes convinced that death is a mercy rather than a violence. But patterns are not explanations. Statistics are not answers, and none of those frameworks give Thy Mitchell her life back. None of them give Maya another morning. None of them give Maxwell another 4 years. What remains in the end is this: a woman who was described by everyone who knew her as a ray of light, a mother who was called devoted, a businesswoman who was chosen by her peers as the best among them, a sister whose family is grieving deeply in private, 2 children whose names we now know, and a table, a beautiful, ambitious, world-embracing table in the Montrose neighborhood of Houston that is still open for dinner, still welcoming strangers, still doing the things she built it to do. Carrying her name forward the only way a restaurant can, one meal at a time. The investigation remains ongoing. The motive remains officially undisclosed. And Houston, like every city that has ever been forced to absorb a tragedy it did not see coming, is left to do the only thing any of us can do when a story ends this way. Remember who was lost, say their names, and ask ourselves honestly what we might be missing in the lives of the people sitting right next to us. Maya Mitchell, Maxwell Mitchell. Gone on a Monday evening in May, in a house where nobody heard a thing.